So good evening and welcome to tonight's lecture. Today we are going to be talking about the network diagram. Previously I introduced you guys to the WBS as well as the Gantt chart and the milestone chart, and we said all those things can be referred to the project visualization tool. So today we are going to be concentrating on the network diagram. And I told you that the network diagram is a diagrammatic representation of the project activities and its duration and interdependency. You understand? Now here is a simplified diagram of this network diagram. Now you see in the diagram you see buses that are interconnected. You understand? Now each of these buses are carrying alphabet as well as numbers. Now the alphabet are referred to as the activities that this project has been broken down into. Understand? While the figures or numbers are referred to as the duration that each of those activity is going to take. So we have activity A with a duration of 5 days, activity B with a duration of 5 days, and so on and so forth. Now with the aid of this network diagram, we can be able to calculate what we refer to as the forward pass in the project, which is also known as the early start and the early finish of the project. Also, we can calculate for the backward pass, which is also known as the late start and late finish for the project. You understand? Then also we continue to calculate what they call the float in the project as well as the critical parts in the project. So as we move on, you get to understand these terminologies more. So let's first of all move to using it to calculate the forward pass. Now this is for the forward pass. So the forward pass is also referred to as the early start and early finish, which is ES and AF. Now to say to calculate the early start the formula is early finish equal to what? Early start. Understand? Then to calculate the early finish is early finish equals to early start plus what? Duration. So as we move on, you get to understand how to apply these formulas. Now this is activity A, and we said it's going to be taking a duration of what? 5 days. Understand? So for the early start, it means the project is going to be taking 5 days. It's going to normally start on what? On the 0 day. So the early start is on the 0 day, and then we finish on the 5th, which is the 5th day. Understand? We finish on the 5th. So for activity A, starting on the 0 day to end on the 5th. Now if you look at the diagram, you also notice that activity B and activity C are dependent on activity A. Understand? So for activity B, the early start is going to be 5. The reason being that this project, since this activity A is ending on the 5th, it means activity B have to start that on the 5th. You understand? Which is what the formula is talking about. Early start, early finish equals to early start. So the early finish for the previous activity is what determines the early start of the next activity. You understand? So since activity A will finish on the 5th, activity B we have to begin on that 5th. You understand? So that's how you got this 5. So you simply just where this one end is when this one starts. You understand? So that is to get the early start for activity B. Now to get the early finish. The early finish for activity B, all you simply have to apply this formula: early start plus duration. That is to say 5, which is the early start, plus 5, which is the duration, and you get 10, which will be your early finish. Understand? For this activity B. So your early start is 5, while your early finish is what? 10. After adding 5 plus 5, you get your 10. So now we'll come to activity C. According to the diagram, activity C is also dependent on what? Activity A. Now like we said for activity B, activity A is finishing on the 5th. That is to say activity C also has to do what? Start on the 5th, since it's dependent on activity A. So you also have to start on the 5th as well. You understand? Which is the formula that we applied earlier. You understand? Where this one end, where activity A end, is where activity B starts. So activity A end on the 5th, that is to say activity C we also start on the 5th. So the early start for activity C is 5th. Now to get the early finish for activity C, simply apply the formula like we said before, early start plus duration. So the early start, which is 5, plus the duration here, which is 10, gives you what? The early finish, which is the 15. You understand? So the next activity is activity D. And according to the diagram, activity D is dependent on activity B as well as activity C. You understand? Now to get the early start for activity D, what you simply do is you take the highest of the early finishes between activity B and activity C. You understand? Remember, activity D is dependent on both. So what you do is you take the highest of the early finishes of between these activity B and activity C. Now the earliest is 15. The highest is what? 15. So your 15 becomes the early start for activity D. You understand? Now the reason is because if like we said, activity B and C, activity D is dependent on B and what? C. You understand? And now activity B will finish on the 10th. So even if this activity B finish on the 10th, activity D still cannot start. Understand why? Because it is dependent on activity C as well. And activity C is ending on the 15th. So even if you finish B on the 10th, you still have to wait for activity C, which is 15th, to finish before you can start what? Activity D. So that is why you are taking the highest between the two. So 15 becomes our early start for activity D. Now to get the early finish, like we have been saying, early start plus duration. So you simply add 50 plus 15 and you get what? 30 as your early finish. So according to this, the entire duration of this project from A to D is going to take what? 30 days. You understand? So 30 days is the earliest this project can finish. So that's what we mean by the early start and early finish. So from this calculation, we can tell that the earliest this project can finish is what? 30 on the 30th, which is the project taking 30 days. So this is for the forward pass. So next, let's look at the backward pass. Now this is for the backward pass. Now remember, the backward pass is also referred to as the late start, which is LS, and what? Late finish, which is LF. You understand? Now the formula to calculate the LF, just like the forward pass, here we have the LS, which is late start, is equals to what? Late finish, as the formula to calculate the late finish of the project. Now to calculate the late start, we have LF, which is late finish, minus what? The duration. So this is the formula we are going to be applying them in the course of the calculations. Now I want to note here is that, say, the backward pass is calculated backwards. You understand? Remember, the forward pass we calculated forward. You understand? Calculated forward. But for this backward pass, we are going to be calculating backwards. So we start from activity D down to what? Activity A. You understand? So that's for the backward pass. So how you calculate the backward pass is simple as well. So what you do here is, now this project, the fact that it is also referred to as late finish, or the latest the project can finish, does not mean that you necessarily have to alter the day that the project will finish. Remember, we said the earliest this project can finish is what? 30th. Now what we are going to be calculating is the latest this project can finish. You understand? Now the fact that it is the latest the project can finish does not mean that the date, the end date for the project has to be altered. You understand? So all you have to do, this project, whether late finish or early finish, is still going to end in 30 days. It's still going to take a duration of 30 days. So all you simply have to do is what? You bring down the early finish, you bring it down to your late finish. You understand? So you bring down your 30 and place it here for the late finish. Then also, if you are going to be rounding up this article D in 30 days, it means you have to also start, the latest you have to start have to be what? On the 15th. Understand? So that you can carry out the whole activity here in 15 days and round up in what? 13 days. So the latest you can also start this project is on the 15th. You understand? So you simply bring down this 15 of the early start down to the down here for the late start. You understand? So now remember we are calculating backwards. So from the diagram, activity D is dependent on B and C, like we already know. Understand? So now to get the late finish for activity B, all you simply have to do is you bring this 15, which is the LS, the late start. The late start here for this activity D. You bring it down to the late finish of activity B. You understand? That's what the formula is talking about. Late start, which is this 15, equal to what? Late finish, which is what? This 15. You understand? So you simply bring the late start down to the late finish for activity B. Now the reason you are bringing this 15, this late start here, 15 for this late start here for the late finish is that now for this project to begin, it means this activity B has to finish latest on the 15th. Understand? Has to finish latest on the 15th in order for activity D to start on the 15th to meet up with the deadline, which is 30th. Understand? So that's why I'm bringing this 15 here. Then also activity D is dependent on activity C. You do the same thing. You simply bring this late start and make it become what? The late finish. You understand? The same reason. That is to say, for this activity to start this 15, it means activity C has to also finish what? Latest 15 for activity D to be able to start. So that's why we are having 15 and 15 as the late finishes for activity B and the activity C. Now the next here is to calculate the late start for activity B. Now to calculate the late start, the formula here say LF, which is late finish, minus duration. That is to say, you simply minus your duration 5 from your late finish 15, and you get your what? Your late start of 10 here. You do the same thing for activity C. Your late finish, which is 15, minus 10, which is the duration from the 15, and you get 5 here as what? Your late start for activity C. You understand? Then we move on to activity A. From the diagram, activity C and B is dependent on what? Activity A. You understand? Now to get the late start and the late finish for activity A, all you simply have to do is you take the lowest between the two late finishes. Remember, B is dependent on A, C is dependent on A as well. Now to get the late, which is this late finish for activity A, what you simply do is you take the lowest late start between activity B and activity C. Now the lowest between the two, B is 10, while C is 5. The lowest between the two is what? Is 5. So you take 5 as your what? Your late finish for activity A. Now the reason you are taking 5 as the late finish for activity A is similar to the same reason why you took 15 out of 10 for the forward pass. You understand? Now for this late finish, all you simply have to do is, the reason why you are taking 5 is that for this project to begin, activity C to begin, it means activity A has to finish on the 5th. You understand? So for activity C to begin, activity A has to finish on the 5th. Why? Because activity C is starting what? On the 5th. For it to start on the 5th, it means activity A has to what? End on the 5th. While on the other hand, activity B is starting on the 10th. You understand? On the 10th. Which means when this activity ends on the 5th, activity C is going to start, but activity D is not going to start. Now you can't start activity B if activity C has not started, because activity C is starting on the 5th. Understand? So as soon as this project stops, this one continues. Why this one can wait? You understand? So when you start this one on the 5th, when it gets on the 10th, activity B will now begins, and so on and so forth. So that's why you take the lowest between the two. You understand? So that's that. So to get your late start, what you simply do is LF minus duration, which is 5 minus 5, it gives you what? 0. So this is how to calculate for the what? The backward pass. I hope it is clear. So next we'll look at how to calculate the float and the critical parts of the project. Now to calculate the float and the critical part, formula to calculate float is LF, which is late finish minus early finish, and late start minus early start. To calculate critical part is late finish minus early finish, and late start minus early start. So we are going to be applying these formulas to calculate the float and the critical parts of the project. Now what you have to know is that the float of the project is any part of that project where you have a space, you have free space or freedom in the course of the project. While the critical part is any part that is critical to the project where you cannot neglect. You understand? If the project is starting on the 5th and to end on the 10th, you have to start that project on the 5th. There is no space or freedom. So that's what the critical part is talking about. After the calculation, you will understand it more. You understand? So for this particular one, let's start with the float. Now, according to this formula, okay, let's start with the critical parts. Or let's just calculate that you understand the float and the critical part. Now, for the formula for the critical part, we say you use LF minus ES and LS minus S. That is to say, late finish minus early finish. Understand? So when you minus 30 from 30, you get what? 0. Okay. It also said late start minus early start. Understand? Once you minus 15 from 15, you get what? 0. Understand? You get 0. I forgot to write the 0 here. So you get 0 as well. Now if you come to activity B, if you minus late finish, minus this early finish from this late finish, you get what? 5, which is 10 minus 15, you get 5. You're supposed to write the 5. You're supposed to write the 5 here. You get 5, you understand? In the same vein, if you minus this 5 minus this early finish minus 10, if you remove early finish from this late finish minus 10, you also get what? 5. You understand? So for this particular activity, we have 5. Then for this particular activity, we have 0. You understand? If you come to activity C and you do the same thing, 15 minus 15, you get 0. 5 minus 5, you get what? 0. You understand? Then also if you come to activity A, 5 minus 5, 0. 0 minus 0, 0. You understand? So for activity A, you have 0. For activity C, you have 0. For activity D, you have 0. Then for activity B, you have 5. You understand? Now, all these parts where your calculation gives you 0, 0, and 0, they are referred to as the critical parts in the project. Why this part where you have 5 after your calculation is regarded as the float. Now the reason why it is regarded as the float is because this 5 means that the project has 5 days of freedom. You understand? 5 days of freedom. Why this part where you have 0 means that there is no freedom at all in those particular activities. You understand? No freedom at all in those particular activities. Now take for instance, for this project, activity B and activity C. Understand? Now, if you are going to be carrying out this activity, remember we said activity B and C, D is dependent on both. Understand? Now, if you are to carry out this project to meet up this 15th, understand, you do not have a free space. You have to do what? Start. Remember, this project has 10 days difference. Understand? So you have to make sure you start that on the 5th so that you can end on the 15th. Understand? Anything that stops you from starting on the 5th, it means you cannot meet up with this on the 15th. If you start on the 6th, you can't meet up with the 15th. If you start on the 7th, you can't meet up with the 15th. So in this particular project, you have to start 5th for you to be able to what? Meet up with the 15th, which is the end date for these particular activities. Then if you come to activity B, you have 5 days of load. That is to say, remember we said for since activity D is dependent on B and C, for D to start has to be on the 15th. You understand? Whereas here for B, the project is ending on the 10th. Now, if this activity is going on, starts on the 5th and end on the 10th, now you say cannot start activity D. Understand? Why? Because it is dependent on activity C, which is ending on the 15th. You understand? So now this particular place, since you have to wait for this guy after ending on the 10th, you still have 5 days to wait for this guy to finish his own project before you can start this. It means this particular guy carrying out this activity has 5 days of float. So 5 days of freedom. Understand? While he is waiting for this guy to complete his project on the 15th, he can decide to travel, visit his wife, visit his family, and come back on the 14th. You understand? And then together they will carry out this particular project. So that's what the float is talking about. So the float is talking about a part in the project where you have freedom or free space in the course of the project. While the critical part are talking of those parts where you do not have freedom at all. Understand? And usually this critical part are the longest parts in a project. You understand? They are the part where you cannot compromise. They are the part where you have to start at that particular date for you to be able to meet up. You understand? Then the float are those parts where you can compromise. Understand? In the course of the project. Now let's just use a little instance to make this particular calculation to be clearer. Now let's take for instance you have 5 persons who went to, you and 5 of your friends went to restaurant to eat. Now of the 5 of you, there's one particular guy who is very, very slow in eating. You understand? Now let's assume the rest of you finish eating in 10 minutes. But that guy takes 20 minutes to eat. You understand? And all of you are supposed to go to an occasion together. You understand? Now in that restaurant, as you are eating, no matter how fast the 4 of you eat, you still have to wait for that last guy that's going to eat for 20 minutes. Understand? That is to say, if the rest of the 4 of you finish in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it doesn't matter. You still have to wait for that guy who is going to take 20 minutes to eat before you can go to that your party. So that guy who takes his time, who eats longer, understand, is the critical part in that project. You understand? Because his own aspect cannot be compromised. It must take 20 minutes for him to eat. So he is critical to that project. How fast that guy eats is very critical to that project. You understand? Whereas the remaining 4 of you can be regarded as a float. Understand? This guy is going to be eating for 20 minutes and the rest of you ate for 10 minutes. It means while you are waiting for this guy to finish eating, you can decide to go and make a call for 5 minutes, for 6 minutes, for 7 minutes, for 8 minutes, for even 10 minutes, and you will say, come and meet this guy before you go for your occasion. You can decide to go and win. You can decide to go and buy something. You can decide to stretch your legs within that or 20 minutes or 10 minutes that is left for that guy to eat. You understand? So those of you that have that freedom to do whatever you want to do within the time frame this guy is going to eat, you guys are regarded as the float in that project, because you can compromise, you can do other things within that time. But this guy that has to take exact 20 minutes to eat is the critical part in the project, and that is why they say the critical part is the longest part in a project. You understand? That guy has to take 20 minutes, and not until he takes the 20 minutes you can go nowhere. Understand? So he is critical to the project, and he is the longest part to that project. So that's what this float and critical part is all about. So I hope it is clear. Thank you very much.